All right, hello and welcome to Draft Brothers, a Champions Round podcast. I am your host, Jeff Hasley, and I am joined by my draft partner and brother, Dan Turner. And this week we break down wide receiver prospects in the NFL draft, and our man of the hour guest is Shane Hallam. And Shane is the managing partner of Draft Countdown. He's also co host of the Devy Marketplace podcast, and he writes for Dynasty League Football. Shane, we are blessed to have your expertise educate us, and we are excited to hear your thoughts and insights about this year's class of wide receivers. Welcome to Draft Brothers.
Oh, thanks guys for having me. It's officially draft season. Football is over, so I'm excited to dig in. I mean, I've been doing it, and I'm excited to bring everyone along here and get into the NFL draft.
Awesome. Well, we're happy to have you. And before we get going, just this quick announcement. If you like sports and playing sporting games, download the Champions Round app. Get playing and start winning. And make sure you use the promo code DRAFTBROS for a free $10 and check out our newest game mode, Spicy Slips. If you love live sports gaming, the NBA, or just want some extra action this NFL offseason, come play Spicy Slips. Build a 2 to 5 leg parlay of live props and win big today. All right, so let's dive in about these wide receivers. Shane, last year we were introduced to several great rookie receivers. I mean, there was Garrett Wilson, Rookie of the Year, Offensive Rookie of the Year, Chris Olave, Drake London, Treylon Burks, Christian Watson, George Pickens, Jahan Dotson. I mean, it keeps going. What can you tell us about this class? That's what we want to know. So who are the standouts?
This class is interesting, and I think it could end up rivaling last year's in terms of production, but we're probably not going to see the same draft capital that we saw from last year. I think we kind of have a big three right now for that first round in Jordan Addison, the receiver from Southern Cal, Quentin Johnston, kind of the big, fast receiver from TCU, and then Jackson Smith and Jigba, the wide receiver from Ohio State that sat out most of the year with a hamstring injury, but had the great year with Wilson and Olave, who you mentioned, outperformed them at Ohio State. So I think those three guys are probably going to go in the first round, maybe top 50, maybe JSN falls a little bit. But I think the second tier in day two, you mentioned Christian Watson and George Pickens, right? We had the round two picks that ended up being pretty good. I think that's where this class is once again going to shine, just like last year, where a guy like Jalen Hyatt from Tennessee, who lit up Alabama for 5 touchdowns, deep threat, Josh Downs, North Carolina, slot receiver, Zay Flowers, Boston College. I think we're probably 10 to 11 strong of day one, day two receivers that can make an immediate impact in the NFL. And to me, that's a pretty good receiver class. Even if you don't have the elite, you don't have the Jamar Chase, you don't have the Julio Jones, you don't have those guys, but it's a pretty good group as a whole.
All right, so I want to talk about the different types of wide receiver positions. You've heard of them, the X, the Y, and the Z. Can you kind of break that down or unpack that a little bit for us? And also, too, if you could give us an idea, who are some of the better slot receivers in this class?
So the X receiver, typically the split end is the receiver that lines up on the line of scrimmage. So that's usually the receiver that's going to face a little bit more of a jam because you have the corners are able to play down on the line and be right there in their face. So you're usually going to put your bigger physical receivers at the X. Jamar Chase is an X receiver. George Pickens is an X receiver, right? Julio Jones was an X receiver. Calvin Johnson, these bigger guys that can get off the line. The Z receiver, the flanker, is the receiver out wide that's off the line of scrimmage, so a step back. So the corner can't get right up in their grill. So you have a little bit of space to work with. So usually you're going to have someone that's maybe a little better route runner or that can complement that bigger player. So at Cincinnati, it's T. Higgins, right? He is the Z. And for Pittsburgh, it's Deontay Johnson. He gets open with that quick first step because he has a little bit of space. That's helpful to him. So that's what the Z receiver does. So, you can kind of work that position a little bit more. The Y receiver is usually the tight end or the fourth receiver, H-back, depending on the formation. And then you have the slot receiver that's kind of, now very much in vogue in the NFL, right? To have this third receiver in the slot that can stay off the line a little bit and do some good things. You mentioned Jackson Smith and Jigba. I mean, he's kind of the ideal slot receiver. That's what he played in college, and that's probably going to be his role in the NFL. But we've seen guys like Justin Jefferson, right? I mean, no one compares to Justin Jefferson, but placed the slot in college at LSU because he had guys like Jamar Chase and Terrace Marshall, and end up being able to transfer out in the NFL, be that ideal, X receiver. I think we have a lot of good slot receivers in this class. I like JSN. I like Josh Downs, the receiver from North Carolina, who played in the slot at North Carolina. Super productive offense, has that really explosive movement off the line and sharp cutting ability. I think helps when you're a slot receiver. One kind of interesting player in the slot, and a name that a lot of people know, is Kayshon Boutee, the receiver from LSU, who profiles more as an outside receiver, might play that in the NFL. But this past year at LSU, he played almost 70% of his snaps from the slot. So now you have an intriguing kind of bigger slot, 6 foot, 205. We saw the Steelers do this with Chase Claypool. When he was there, he played the slot. So I think Boutee can do that. And then one of my favorites, a little bit underrated player that I think is going to get noticed, Tyler Scott, receiver from Cincinnati, 5'11", 185. I mean, his route running, his footwork is phenomenal. And so it becomes really tough to cover when he can go any way and running out or running in, run a slant. He's going to be someone on day 2 that's I think people are going to really take notice of.
I like that. I like that a lot. Lots of good names there. Dan, question for you. Who is your top receiver in this draft class? I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are, because there's the 3, there's the big 3. And I think it depends on who you ask, who's their top guy. I'm going to ask you who you think yours is.
Coming into this year, not seeing, Jackson Smith and Jigba for, most of the year, you pretty much have to go on what he did before, which was amazing. Don't get me wrong. But I just think the way that Quentin Johnston played, especially for TCU, which isn't a traditional superpower, especially in the playoffs, where it took 3 guys to get to knock him out of the game. But he had a huge semifinals. I think for me it's Quentin Johnston in this class. I think that JSN is going to be right up there with them and could be taken first, and deservedly so. He had a great year when he was in there. But I just think that based on what Johnston did this past year, I like him just a little bit more to go number 1.
All right. Well, we're going to talk about our wide receiver predictions a little bit later, but I like that answer. That's good. So, Shane, we talked a little bit about some later second day 2 receivers. Is there anyone else that you think could surprise? Is there any specific receivers that were kind of hindered due to poor quarterback play in college? Who's kind of like on the outside but can get right in with a good opportunity at the combine, or a good showing, or a good offensive coach?
I think there's a couple late round guys I like. I'm always a small school receiver guy. I was a big Christian Watson guy last year, and that worked out. This year, my favorite small school receiver is Andrea Sivas from Princeton. Ooh. Not a typical college where you get a lot of NFL players coming out of, but he's a track athlete, did the shot put, did track at Princeton, 6'3", came in at 212 pounds at the Senior Bowl, and probably is going to run 4.4 flat, something like that. So he's got the size, the speed. 2 years ago, it was a track guy playing football. He's just running up the field and didn't know how to catch, didn't know how to do anything. Last year really transitioned to a football player. So a little raw, but a player that I think could, good combine, start moving up the board. People were buzzing. You want those big, fast guys, and there's not a ton of them in this class. I also like Michael Wilson from Stanford, is another bigger 6'2", 216 receiver. Stanford run first offense, didn't get that opportunity. I know people like Tanner McKee as quarterback in this class. I don't know how you didn't use this guy, because Wilson really attacks the ball, really goes after it. Great at boxing out opposing corners and using his length to his advantage. So I think there's a couple of those kind of bigger guys, that are pretty good on the day 3 side. And then, one name I'll mention, I think it's in day 2, but is another name that's has some production. It's Marvin Mims, the receiver from Oklahoma, 5'11", 179. He's another smaller slot type receiver, but has some pretty good speed, really good at utilizing the space there at Oklahoma, manipulating the safety, doing some of those small things really well, which I like. The size is a concern, but he's someone to keep an eye on that could end up being pretty productive in the league.
All right, great. These are some excellent answers because I'm sure a lot of our viewers are just kind of learning these names right now as we speak, and they're probably looking them up, writing them down, or at least getting them in their memory. So we definitely appreciate that. I want to ask you, do you have any specific range of stats or measurements that you kind of use to help you determine how you rank your receivers? Do you do that at all? I mean, you mentioned, 6'2", 215-ish, or in that range. Is there a certain type of range that you look for that you that's like your sweet spot?
I think it's all relative. I'm definitely a film guy first and foremost, but I've started to kind of put that analytic side into your game, right? It's working. A lot of NFL teams are moving in that direction. And a lot, we got to wait for the combine to happen and get some of these, I think, times along with the sizes. We talked about the different types of receivers before. I think it's important to look at the size ranges of receivers. What did they play in college? And how does that match up? You can have a smaller receiver that's under 180 pounds. That used to be kind of the standard. You got to at least be 180. This year, we're going to get, Jordan Addison, Josh Downs, Zay Flowers, Marvin Mims, probably under 180 pounds. So it's the way that the NFL is moving a little bit. So I think it's important not to be kind of boxed in, but I like to take the combine measurements. We get the 40 time, we get the shuttle, right? You get some of these different measurements for these receivers to test quickness, explosiveness, and speed, and match them up to the size. I think that's what some people don't do. They're like, wow, this guy runs a 4.3. Well, Tank Dell from Houston's going to run a 4.3. He's 168 pounds. So I hope so. If you want to be in the NFL, you better run a 4.3 at 160 some pounds. So I like to use relative athletic score, which is Raz.football. You can find relative athletic scores going way back. That basically takes the size of the player to the position and analyzes the numbers and comes up with a score out of 10, historically comparing them to every receiver that's ever worked out for the NFL draft, like ever. And so you kind of get a sense of you're a 10, you are like the top 0.001%. And so we had a guy, tight end, Jelani Woods last year, right? Raz 10. I think Christian Watson was like a 9.98, so you see with the size that comes into play. So I think it's about taking the whole picture. And then obviously, like I said, I'm a film guy, so I'll go back and watch if things don't match up. This guy's a lot faster than I remember him being when I watched him. Let me go back and watch and see, maybe he plays slow, or maybe I missed it. I think that's something you need to take into account.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. There's so many different factors and everything involved in that. Dan, do you have a question that you want to ask Shane?
Yes, I do, actually.
I know
so,
you do.
So after always after the top three guys, you mentioned them before. Which receiver do you think will have the best, be the best translating into the NFL after the top three?
It's a good question because I think after the top three, there is a lot of different receivers depending on what your flavor is. I think in terms of a translation from a complete standpoint, I really like Zay Flowers, the receiver from Boston College. He is kind of my top six. He's the only one that's a 4-year player that was a senior, essentially, playing at Boston College in a pretty bad offense these past 2 years. But you see the after the catch ability, using him on screens, using him in short passes. I think we're seeing so many teams want a player that can do that, and he can stick around the league. I mean, you look in the Super Bowl at Kadarius Toney, getting utilized in that way. Even if he's not the best player, it's, can you do things in open space? I think Zay Flowers can do that. So I like that translation more as more of a complete potential receiver, even at, 5'10", $172. I think other players are going to have good roles. Like I really like Jalen Hyatt out of Tennessee is my number 4 receiver because I think he can beat guys deep even without. He has really great speed, but it's not just speed. It's a lot of the manipulation of some of the cover 2 and 2-man under type of defenses that he did in college. I think is super unique. But I don't know if that's going to translate into this like stud receiver, right? You're going to get a couple deep passes a game and it looks good. So I'll go with Flowers, but I think, like I said, I think it's a good day 2 receiver class. You can find some players that can make an impact.
All right, Shane, if you'll allow me here, I kind of want to go off script. I've got a question that I want to ask. And I think you're up to handling it here. But so a lot of times we see receivers who are like really good and strong and intelligent, and they're cerebral, like a Terry McLaurin, knows all about the game. Is there anyone in particular that you see in this class that just has that head over shoulders above everyone else in terms of being cerebral and understanding and being an intelligent type of player or receiver that just kind of stands out to you?
I'll give you 2 names. When you say that, there's like 2 names that pop into my head. One is Rashee Rice, the receiver from SMU, who you're like, oh, an SMU receiver, right? But super productive in this offense. And I think what he does, a lot of times these cerebral receivers aren't like you mentioned, Jeff, aren't the guys that necessarily have the athletic ability that they're beating you in that way. And Rashee Rice is 6'1", 200. He's not super fast, not lightning quick, but man, he's just always in the right position. He understands positioning of the defense. He's so good at using some physicality at the line to get open. Drops the ball every now and then, but in terms of understanding what defenses are doing, I'm not sure there's anyone better than him, and it's why he was able to be the number 1 receiver at SMU. You knew the ball was going to him all the time. That's the only person they threw to, and he had a lot of success. The other one's Cedric Tillman out of Tennessee, Jalen Hyatt's running mate, 6'3", 215, a bigger receiver. Once again, really productive, playing against SEC corners. And, just the way that he sells his routes. One thing that Tillman does is he runs every route the same. I think it's so underrated in the league. If you don't know if he's running a 9 route, you don't know if he's going to turn and run a slant, you don't know if he's going to run a curl, right? When he takes off, it looks the same every time. And so I think that's why he always seems a little bit too open. Like, how's that happen? Usually that's the reason. So to me, that shows just in a sense of the very small things that it takes to be successful at the receiver position.
All right. Excellent. Good answers. We love this content, man. All right. So one last question, one final prediction. All right. Take 10 seconds. Who is your first wide receiver that's going to be selected in the draft? Shane.
I think it's going to be Jordan Addison, the receiver from Southern Cal, Pitt transfer, small. That's the downside, because I think Dan's pick of Quentin Johnston, with the big size and speed is probably a good bet. But I think Addison just has been so good. I think the combine, he's going to show up along with Johnston, and teams are just going to be more comfortable fitting Jordan Addison into their system. 2 different systems he played in college. I think you're going to feel a little more comfortable with him.
All right. Dan, still sticking with the Q?
Yeah, gotta stick with the guy I mentioned earlier, Johnson, for all the reasons that Shane mentioned. I just think that that size, speed, he's probably going to test out of his mind at the combine, and teams fall in love with that. So I mean, Jordan Addison's a great pick. I wouldn't be surprised if he went first. I just think that when teams are going to look at his measurables, and that's going to be the difference for whoever is picking the wide receiver first. Could be Carolina.
All right. Yeah, I mean, it could. All right. My pick, I don't have any kind of like drum roll here. I think it's also Quentin Johnston. And I just like what he's able to do in terms of, being he's almost like a 5-tool receiver, if you want to call him that. He can make contested catches. He can run out to the catch. He can run good routes, right? I mean, he just has that whole package, and I like that. So I think that he'll be the first guy. All right. So let's wrap this up. We want to thank you for tuning in, and we want to thank you, Shane, and check out all of his work at draftcountdown.com. We always appreciate you sharing your thoughts and your insights. We appreciate your support, everybody, our viewers here. Please do us a favor. If you like the show, give us a like, a subscribe, a comment, all that good stuff that helps us crush the algorithm. So stay tuned to our show next when we do a full breakdown of the top quarterbacks in the draft with guest John Lobb of Football Diehards as we continue our preparation for the NFL draft. Thank you so much. Your entertainment is our passion. We'll see you next week.
See ya.
Thank you.